Senator Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Radney, I'd like to first turn to you to talk with you about the country that you're intending to represent the United States to. American families are suffering everywhere from high gas prices, and I understand that President Biden is on his way to Saudi Arabia next month, presumably to ask the Saudis to produce more oil and bail the United States out of this energy disaster that the Biden administration has created based on its war on the American fossil fuel industry. This trip comes not long after President Biden, during his presidential campaign in a Democratic presidential debate, decided that he would turn Saudi Arabia into a, quote, pariah. And he added that there is, quote, very little social redeeming value in the present government in Saudi Arabia. Those are his words during the presidential debate. I actually believe that the Saudis can be a very critical partner to us in the Middle East. And I'd first like to know if you agree with President Biden's stated posture towards Saudi Arabia.
Thanks for the question, Senator. I don't think I'm in a position to comment on comments that the president made during the campaign or more than a year ago. I can tell you what he's said since he's been president. I can tell you what he has been determined to do since he's been president, and that is to carve out a relationship with the Saudi government that both advances U.S. interests and also reflects U.S. values. And we have vast U.S. interests in Saudi Arabia, including, as you point out, a conversation about energy prices, gas prices that we're facing here in global turbulence in energy markets. There's a lot of other things. Ending the war in Yemen, cooperating on counterterrorism, pushing back on Iran's nefarious activities in the region that threaten us and our partners, and at the same time advancing our values. So I have every expectation that the president will use this trip, which he's making to Saudi Arabia, in addition to conversations with other Gulf leaders and other Middle Eastern leaders, to have forthright discussions about responsible role Saudi Arabia.
Do you agree that our diplomatic relations are better off without an antagonistic relationship with a country as important as Saudi Arabia?
I don't think I would relish the possibility of being U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia if I thought an antagonistic relationship was a good direction to go in. I think my colleagues in our leadership in this administration agree with that. And
well, if you're confirmed, you're going to have a lot to clean up, I think, given the situation as it exists right now. I'd like to turn now to your time as Consul General in Jerusalem. Under your watch, the State Department provided $465,000 in grants to a group called One Voice, which then joined a group called Victory 15 and worked to defeat Benjamin Netanyahu and his Likud party in Israel's elections. This struck many observers, including me, as highly inappropriate, if not unethical, especially given that the Obama administration disagreed with Netanyahu and his many policies, including the Iran nuclear deal. I understand that the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations reviewed this case and reported out its findings, and according to that report, One Voice's pivot to electoral politics was consistent with its strategic plan that was developed by One Voice leadership. One Voice had emailed this strategic plan to the State Department officials during the grant period. However, the State Department placed no limitations on the post-grant use of resources developed by One Voice using the funds provided by the United States. Again, there were no limitations placed on how the resources of the funds would be used. The grant was just given by the State Department, even though the State Department had their strategic plan in hand. I think it's a failure of the State Department, again, under your watch, to take the necessary steps to guard against the risk that One Voice would engage in political activities to unseat a particular foreign head of government. So I want to ask you, Mr. Ratney, given that One Voice engaged in political activism in the 2013 Israel elections, before applying for a State Department grant, how was it that you failed to foresee and guard against this risk? The ease of that would have, that recipient organizations can use to repurpose public diplomacy resources is something that's very concerning, and I am very concerned about what happened here.
Thanks for the question. And I do recall the incident, and I recall my work there. I was responsible for oversight of a piece of that grant, which was to the Palestinian component of One Voice, which was responsible for essentially building grassroots support for a two-state solution in the negotiating process that was underway at that point. The Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations that Senator Portman chaired at the time looked into it, as you mentioned, and noted a few deficiencies in the way that that grant was handled, one of which is exactly what you point out, which is there was no restriction in the grant agreement for how they would use the data. In this case, it was a database and some other things that they had developed in the process of doing the work.
Well, I think it's extremely concerning that that failure occurred, but I want to ask you one more question before my time is expended. Do you dispute what was reported in the findings that you deleted emails related to the review of these One Voice grants?
No, so the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations identified two shortcomings. One had to do with the administration of the grant, which we talked about, which was that there was no prohibition on
Political activity.
organization using it later. That is something that I made clear in my conversations with the staff on the Permanent Subcommittee that would be unacceptable had we known about it. The other problem had to do with a systemic issue associated with records management at the State Department that has since been addressed. There was no routine method, there was no routine way at that time to archive all of the routine emails that the State Department sent and received. That has since been remedied as well through changes in policy and changes in technology.
To be clear, did you delete emails that were relevant to this? Did you specifically pursue those emails and remove them from the record?
So as I recall what happened at the time, and I want to be very precise about this because it's an important issue. At the time, this is somewhat of a technical issue, but at the time, the State Department, the email systems didn't have the storage capacity to retain large numbers of emails in people's inboxes. So we were routinely instructed by, and this was not unique to me, we were routinely instructed by our IT staff that if you don't delete emails, especially those with large attachments, your inbox freezes and you stop getting emails. So that was a systemic problem that was addressed both by improvements in the technology and also a change to the policy about archiving of these messages.
Well, you can understand my concern over that part of it, but my even deeper concern is that funds were allowed to go to an organization that was going to take direct action against one of our political allies and get involved politically in that manner. I think it's a great oversight, and it creates grave concern for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would note that I think the Democratic majority on this committee may have inadvertently